Thinking aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
A 100% of shame-based individuals typically have addiction or emotional mood or some type of emotional problem.
They tend to shut down emotionally.
They shut down and they look for soothing, self-soothing in the form of pills, liquid, alcohol.
The inner pain is so great.
That's right.
That they're not even able to talk about it.
That's right. So they go to that place where we call self-love, liquid love, and that's alcohol. But we find that 100% of my addict patients have toxic shame. Now, 100% of the population doesn't have toxic shame. We all have shame or the ability to experience shame, but toxic shame is something else, and that's 100% of the of people with addictions, mood disorders, or personality disorders suffer some form of toxic shame. They just, Jeff, they never feel good enough about themselves.
And the shame gets reinforced through self-talk.
Self-talk is how I began this whole journey, as you and I talked earlier, and I want your audience to understand that I was listening to self-talk. I was following self-talk. Everybody has self-talk.
That inner voice.
That inner voice. And oftentimes people with toxic self-talk have that toxic shame going on. You're not good enough. It's like an endless loop.
Yeah.
And where does this come from? Do children create this on their own? No. It's usually taken in by an adult. Adults say you're not good enough, or stay away from me. We don't want to have time with the child. Whatever that child feels neglected or violated or abandoned, that child's self-talk is going to be really, really bad.
They internalize the harsh voice of a parent.
Right. You know, even Freud talked about this, that Freud talked about inculcating the voice of the adult or the abuser, if you will. And we've kind of gotten away with that with our empirical studies and our empirical procedures like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is highly empirical.
Yeah.
But this is a whole different approach because cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work with treating shame.
Well, you spent much of your career as a cognitive behavioral therapist.
I am a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I'm very proud of it. But I also know that I lost about 40% of my clinical patients before I started this study of shame to understand how you deal with it. And you can't deal with it through cognitive behavioral therapy, because the minute I started, my patients would bolt. The minute when they started to talk about their wound and the violations, and if I jumped into it like a cognitive behavioral therapist, they would bolt.
And the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy being, well, you just need to readjust your thinking.
Yeah, you know, Bobby, you're really not a bad boy, so why don't we try to adjust that sound in your head? Never worked. Never worked. Because the individual has to expunge. They have to relieve themselves of that toxic wound. And one way to do it is through what I call compassion-based relational therapy, because you have to relate to the patient at their level. You still have to be in charge, kind of, but you have to relate to the patient at their level so they can express their shame. And until and unless they can express their shame, and what manifestation it takes, what form it takes, they're not going to release it at all.
It's about processing the, as you call it, the affect, the precursor to the emotion.
Absolutely.
Which is something very, very deep inside the brain.
It's very deep inside the brain. It's a wound, if you will. But that wound can be healed.